quick bit of information. There are actually two versions of this video, a short and a long. This is the short version. If you have 30 minutes to spare, I highly suggest clicking the link in the description for the longer version. Except for this intro, it has all the footage that is included in this video, plus a whole lot more, and I personally think it's cooler. But I understand that not everyone has 30 minutes that they can spend watching these videos, so for you folks, I made this.
One thing that is growing a little bit down in here, though, right in here. Popcorn. Popcorn.
Ave everyone! Welcome to Series 7 of Vidrio Teithio, the first series under the new way of doing things. If you have any suggestions at any time, be sure to leave them in the comments. Feedback is always appreciated, both positive and negative, as long as it is constructive. Anyhow, let's get to the monument. The signs say no trailer travel recommended on this road out to the park, but we're gonna try it anyway. The road was very narrow and windy, also steep at parts, but hardly the most treacherous path we've been on in the RV. Going downhill might be a different story, but we've arrived at the visitor center without incident.
The cave was first discovered, as far as we know, in 1874 by a hunter. These mountains around us here, this whole region, is very, very complicated. The geology of the rocks up in these mountains is very complex. The ecology is also very complicated up in these mountains. We have some of the highest biodiversity up here anywhere in the United States, even in the world, at least as far as temperate forests go. A lot of different species call the cave home. Of the ones that live inside, actually a few that live outside too, they're what we call endemic, meaning they live nowhere else in the entire world. This cave actually has more endemic species than any other cave in the United States. Another really interesting thing actually about this cave is the rock from which it's formed. It's a marble cave. Now that's kind of unusual. Only about 5% of the caves in the world are made from marble. So if everyone is ready, we'll follow the river Styx on into the underworld of Oregon Caves. So yeah. Welcome to the cave, everybody. One thing real quick before we move on, I want to point out our first cave formation. We call it cave popcorn. This popcorn here actually grows a little differently than most things in the cave. It forms by evaporation. Water condensing to the walls and then evaporating away, leaving behind minerals, calcite. Actually, it really only grows near cave entrances, where you have a lot of air flowing, where you have changing temperatures. And that's exactly why you actually don't really have larger cave formations growing in here. So this is where we start to see some of the first larger formations in the cave. Can anyone tell me what we call these big pointy things here up on the ceiling?
Stalactites.
Yeah, absolutely right. There's also a lot of these really skinny, kind of straight ones up here, like right in there especially. They're basically baby stalactites. We call them soda straws. They are hollow, just like a straw. You can see drops of water hanging from the ends of quite a few of them. As it hangs there, it leaves behind a little ring of calcite. Those rings build up, drop by drop. The straws get longer and longer, until that hole plugs up in the middle. Water moves on the outside and makes them thicker and wider and longer. And that's how we get stalactites. These big fins hanging off the walls, we call these cave draperies. Look a lot like curtains or drapes. What I wanted to actually show you in this passageway is the rock. A lot of marble you see is very white. This marble has a lot of these bluish black bands of color. The mineral graphite.
What are the lines?
So these lines up here, these are basically little cracks, little stress fractures in the marble that the water has filled in with calcite. If water were to flow through this passageway again, it would actually dissolve the marble and just leave those little lines of calcite behind. And you would get something called boxwork. It's a very rare cave formation, actually. There's a cave in South Dakota, Winged Cave National Park, world famous for their boxwork. Wow. Awesome. Quite a bit warmer up here, you probably noticed. This is a natural entrance. That's daylight coming down right there. It's basically a sinkhole. Real quick before we move on, quick note about all this popcorn up here. Really cool thing about some of this popcorn is that it's growing on cave draperies. These things can't grow near an entrance like this. I talked a bit about that at the beginning. So these draperies actually grew before that entrance existed. When that opened up and let air down here, the draperies stopped growing. Popcorn grew up on top. This formation right back here, we call this Niagara Falls. our very own Niagara Falls here in Oregon. Some interesting history back in this part of the cave, actually. One of the earliest cave guides realized that there were more passages down below, tunneled through right here. But before that, tour groups would stop right here. In those days, it was a very difficult journey to come see the caves, even more difficult than driving up that crazy road. Back then, there was no road. It meant several days on horseback through the mountains to get here. In addition to breaking off souvenirs, a lot of folks also decided to record their journey.
Oh.
Most of this writing is very, very old. 1897 right there, 1885. Of course, today carries a hefty fine with it, but back then there was no penalty. In 1917, funny story, the Forest Service came in here and tried to erase all of this writing. Found out they couldn't. Water flowing down has covered it up with a layer of calcite. This list of names, for instance, in 1885, geology class from the University of Oregon. Signed at the top by their instructor, Professor Thomas Condon, rather famous geologist. Got a building named after him at the University of Oregon. Down at the bottom of the steps, we're actually going to see one of the oldest formations in the entire cave. It's what happens when a stalactite and a stalagmite meet and join together. When that happens, does anybody know what we call them?
The column.
So that column right back there, we call that the grand column, for obvious reasons. A really good preview of our next room, one of my favorites in the cave. We call this room Miller's Chapel. Got that name in 1937 when the first wedding was held down here. Rather famous wedding known as the Caveman Wedding.
It takes a little bit.
Entire wedding party dressed up as cave people. Picture of them all lined up right up in here. This little guy right over here I like to point out before moving on. You can maybe see something peering at us from the wall of the cave, maybe a ghostly face. I like to point him out before moving on because the next room of the cave is actually known as the ghost room. yellowish brown tan color. These white formations are very, very pure calcite. We saw back at Niagara Falls with those signatures that calcite is actually clear. These white formations look this way because of air bubbles, a lot like ice. If you were to squeeze all the air out of ice, it actually turns blue, like glacial ice. These formations are calcite, just like the marble, just formed in a very different way. Ahead of us here, we'll make a quick stop and have a look at a very different sort of calcium deposit, one that we haven't seen up to this point. This is the different sort of calcium deposit that I mentioned right here. Of course, bones and teeth, another calcium-based mineral. These bones right here are the remains of a baby black bear. Came down into the cave about 3,000 years ago and didn't make it back out again. And we found some pretty interesting remains in this cave, actually. One of the most interesting, probably the skeleton of an Ice Age jaguar. The farthest north and farthest west jaguar remains have ever been found in North America. Also one of the world's best collections of salamander fossils.
It's 12:39. We just got out of the cave. Very interesting tour. Anyway, now we're just hiking back to the visitor center, the long way around, over the mountain to see what we can see on the nature trail. They have informative plaques along the path, such as this one, to explain what seasons are for visitors from California. And here's the view. It's 14:06 now. We just finished going through the visitor center, and now we're going to grab some sustenance at the chateau. A historic wooden structure built in the late 1800s, I believe. Correction, according to the menu, it was built during the Great Depression. I got the Reuben with fries. My mom got the tuna melt with a pasta salad.
Bread was good, lots of cheese. Pasta salad was very good.
My Reuben was also excellent. Wasn't the corniest corned beef that I've had. A lot of cheese, which was awesome. The fries are very salty. Anyhow, we just ordered some shakes. I got toasted marshmallow. She got a fresh cookie because they were out of cookie dough.
Toasted marshmallow?
Thank you.
Cookie? Thank you. You're very welcome.
So the total came out to $33.65.
These milkshakes are pretty big, so I guess it's reasonable. I think the milkshakes are a little high, but they're good.
And historical.
And historic.
It's 21:03 now. We just watched some YouTube stuff after getting to the Medford Walmart. So we're going to stay the night here. I'll let you know how it goes tomorrow. VF.